Hello, good afternoon. I'm Shannon Uroom. I'm the Prevention Wellness Services Coordinator at Northwestern Community Services Board. Welcome. Thank you for joining our final presentation in a three-part series that's been aimed at providing education and resources for individuals, community groups, and coalition members actively working to help children, youth, families, and local communities thrive. This series has been in collaboration with our core prevention partners, Page Alliance for Community Action, the Warren Health Coalition, Family Youth Initiative, and the Northern Shenandoah Valley Substance Use Coalition. Our presenter today is Dr. Elena Holt. Dr. Holt holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and Forensic Science, and in 2023 completed her PhD in Forensic Toxicology from Virginia Commonwealth University. She is now an associate faculty member in the Department of Forensic Science at VCU. Elena works with her longtime mentor, Dr. Michelle Peace, studying the efficacy of electronic cigarettes, particularly as they pertain to substance use and abuse. Elena's interests include emerging toxicology issues, providing support for science-based legislation, regulation, and policies, and educating the public and key stakeholders about research findings that impact public health and safety. Today's presentation will delve into the Confiscated Vape Project that VCU's Department of Forensic Science is conducting. Additionally, information will be shared on trends and substances in our communities are encountering, the evolution of cannabis, and consumer case histories. Thank you so much, Dr. Holt, for being with us today, and I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Shannon, for that introduction, and thank you all for attending today. I'm excited to talk to you about the research that's coming out of our lab here at Virginia Commonwealth University. So just to start off, I do always like to mention that the work that I'm talking about is funded by the National Institute of Justice, as well as a grant through the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth. So anything that I say are my own opinions and should not be reflected back on those two organizations. And just to get us started off, to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page, I'm just going to go over a little bit of history regarding electronic cigarettes. So the modern electronic cigarette entered the US around 2006 or so. And when they first came to the marketplace, they kind of resembled a traditional combustible cigarette here, and they're called the first generations. They went through several evolutionary iterations then based off of consumer demands and changes to the marketplace. So from the first generation, we saw an emergence of this vape pen or battery pen. The third generation turned into these mods. They were much larger, bulkier, and they allowed the user to have more control over settings such as how much airflow the device got, the voltage that was being used with the device, things of that nature. And the second and third generation were important because they allowed the user to use a refillable e-liquid product in them, so they could put their own e-liquid in it. The fourth generation was just a difference in the mouthpiece of the third generation. They had a wider mouthpiece, which actually allowed users to drop a liquid right onto the coil or place a solid substance such as like a cannabis dab right onto the mouthpiece to vape that way. And then kind of changing course, whereas the e-cigarettes had been getting larger and larger over those generations, the fifth generation, which includes the pod mods, the things like Juul that we're more familiar with, really switched it up and became much smaller, more discreet, and they really facilitated that discreet vaping habit that we're having issues with today. So since those generations, which are recognized by the FDA and the CDC, we've seen a really high emergence of all of these discrete vaping types. So here's just some examples that you can find online. Here's a backpack where the vape is integrated into the straps. There's hoodies where the vape is in the drawstrings, watches, cell phone cases. all kinds of things where if you're not really looking hard, you might miss that it's not being used for its intended purpose, but as a way to discreetly vape. About 1 to 2 years ago, we started having people reach out saying we're finding pens and highlighters that are designed to hide the vape in it, and students are using them in class. So you think they're just like chewing on the end of their pen, but they're actually vaping right in class in front of you. And then the newest wave of products that we're seeing, there are some where they're allowing the user to adjust how much flavor or how much of that cooling effect comes out of the product, which can be really detrimental in terms of abuse liability. Elf Bar is a really popular brand, and they just came out with a product where it's half nicotine, half THC based. We're seeing all kinds of products coming in from other countries that look almost just like a toy or milk carton. So all of these things that can be easily overlooked by parents and other adults. And then one that's really concerning for me is there are all of these devices now that are essentially like video games with a vape. Some of them, if anyone's from my generation, they're kind of like a Tamagotchi pet, where in order to keep the pet fed, you have to vape in order to get coins to use to purchase like the pet food. So ways to encourage kids to be using these more and more and more frequently. That being said, regardless of what the vape itself looks like, they all function the same way. So they'll all have a battery that heats up this atomizer. And when the atomizer heats up, the e-liquid that's in contact with the coil will turn into an aerosol that gets inhaled by the user. So in my lab, we do like to characterize the product types, but we really focus on the ingredients that are in the liquid used, which is called the e-liquid. And what we found over the years, regardless of whether the product is from the regulated marketplace or the unregulated marketplace, the labels that are on these products are very vague and incomplete. So here's two products that came from our lab, and I just took a snapshot. And you'll notice that all it says is that it has propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, nicotine, and artificial flavorings. So the flavorings could be one or two things. It could be 20 things. So the labels aren't really describing that well. And what we know about those flavorings is all of them that are being used in these products, the manufacturers like to say, oh no, they're safe to use. They're recognized by the FDA as a generally recognized as safe substance. One of the very first lies that came out of the e-cigarette and vaping industry was that the aerosol was just water vapor. And what we know is that all of these flavoring chemicals that they say are safe to use are only recognized as safe when they are ingested or eaten. So it's not necessarily safe to inhale. Also, what you will see when you look at the products is all of those flavoring chemicals that they like to say are generally recognized as safe, almost all of them have some sort of hazard class associated with them. So benzoic acid, for example, is in a lot of products. It's what makes a nicotine salt formulation the salt. And you'll see from its classification, it's recognized as a corrosive, as an irritant, and as a health hazard. So vanillin and menthol are two other very common flavoring ingredients in these e-liquid products. They also are both associated with being an irritant. So just recognizing that the manufacturers are trying to spin it so that all of these ingredients are safe when we know for a fact that they do have these hazards associated with them. And we're probably all familiar with it, but right around 2019, everything started to kind of come crashing down on the e-cigarette industry. There was all of these folks that were using products that ended up being hospitalized. It was deemed the EVALI epidemic. It hit all kinds of media outlets, newspaper, the CDC was tracking it. And then right around that same time, there was a whistleblower who worked for Juul, one of the largest e-cigarette companies of that time, saying, hey, I know for a fact that Juul knowingly sold tainted pods and did nothing to recall or warn their consumers about it. And right around that same time, we had a colleague working in another research program at VCU that had purchased some Juul products because they wanted to use them for a clinical study where they were going to have people inhale them. So before they had their participants inhaling this unknown e-liquid, they said, hey, do you mind just testing it to see what's in it? We said, no problem. So when we looked at it, generally speaking, it looked like what I would expect in terms of ingredients, but we did find this one compound in there that was identified as gamma-butyrolactone. And this was a concern because when you ingest gamma-butyrolactone, it turns into gamma-hydroxybutyric acid, which is also known as GHB, which is used as a date rape drug. So now we're wondering, why in the world is Juul putting GBL in a product intended to be inhaled, particularly inhaled by young people? Additionally, the label also just said it had propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, nicotine, and flavoring chemicals with benzoic acid, but we identified several other compounds, which is just another demonstration of how poorly these products are labeled and really highlighting that consumers don't understand fully what they're putting in their body. Throughout the years, we've also found that many of the products are inaccurate in terms of what they label the nicotine concentration as. So for this figure, just to orient you, if the label matched what we identified in the lab as the nicotine concentration, there would be no bar. It would just be right in the center. But as you move more towards the left or more towards the right, there was a greater difference between what was on the label for nicotine concentration versus what we identified. We've also seen just recently where we've purchased some Vuse products, and within the same blister pack, the two pods included were visibly different in color. And when we tested them, they were different nicotine concentrations, and neither one of them matched the 5% that was on the label here. So just again, demonstrating the giant quality assurance issues that are still ongoing in the marketplace today. Some other things that we have seen from our research is that as those e-cigarettes became smaller and smaller and more discreet, they really started getting adopted for use with drugs other than nicotine. And we do a lot of online reconnaissance. We go on to Reddit and other drug user forums just to keep track of what people are saying. And there was all kinds of advice about how you can put any drug you want into your e-liquid and use it and no one will know, including things like meth, opium, and fentanyl derivatives, and other drugs. So then for us in our research lab, COVID happened. We weren't allowed to be around one another, but we wanted to continue our research. So we decided to deploy a survey across the country just saying, hey, what do you put in your e-cigarettes? And we actually had about 90 people respond, which I was surprised by. And here's kind of a snapshot of what they said. So most people reported putting THC or cannabis materials into their e-cigarette, which was unsurprising to us. But we did also have some people saying they were adding herbal supplements, caffeine. Some people were trying to get their daily vitamins. And then we also asked, are you putting combinations of drugs in your product? And here's just some of the results. So you can see there was a lot of nicotine with cannabis related material put together. We did have one person say that they were using THC, CBD, Xanax, ketamine, LSD, Vyvanse, and coffee. So that person was all over the place in terms of the drugs that they were putting in their vape to use. And it's just important to consider because a lot of people, when they see a vape, they just think, oh, it's nicotine, not a big deal. So we've been trying to work with law enforcement and other individuals just to make them aware that just because you see a vape does not mean it's solely nicotine. It could have any other number of substances that the user themselves have put in it to adulterate it. Another thing that we found through our studies is that there are several products on the market that contain ethanol or alcohol, and it's almost never on the label. So we've seen products that have as much as about 27% ethanol by volume, which is important to consider, especially when we have young people accessing these products. So now they have alcohol in them, should also be another reason why it should be a 21 and up market only. Now, switching gears just a little bit, we're going to talk about the cannabis industry and just some key points that I think everyone should be aware of. Currently, the state-to-state regulatory map, it's just a patchwork. We have about 40 states and the District of Columbia that have medical use legalized, 24 states in DC where adult recreational use is legal, and we're still at a federally illegal stance, though the DEA has been considering changing its classification. So because of all of these differing state regulations, we have really inconsistent quality assurance requirements for the manufacturers of cannabis products. We know there are issues with people crossing state lines to get access to products, and because of the lack of federal oversight, there's just a general lack of regulatory enforcement, which is all leading to quality assurance problems. Additionally, as more and more states are moving to a legal status, we've also seen this uptick in the per capita use in the United States. So right around 2010 is where we started really noticing this exponential rise in use, whether it's daily, monthly, or yearly prevalence. And so some early cases that we had come into our lab, because we are very vocal about monitoring quality assurance and things like that, we have had people reach out to us and say, hey, I used this vape product and I had a really horrific experience. Do you mind just telling me what's in it? And we always say, yes, send them to us. We'll see what we can do to get you some questions or answer some of your questions. So what we noticed is through about mid 2019, most of the vaping products that were sent to us contained synthetic cannabinoids or just high doses of delta-9 THC, which is the main psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. So you'll see people who had these feelings of being disconnected from reality. They had a mother found her son in his bedroom. She said he was just sitting there, looked very pale, very glassy-eyed. We had a nurse who used it, a CBD product in place of other anti-pain medications, and she said she had been using one CBD product effectively for a really long time, went back and bought a different brand, and then ended up hospitalized in her own hospital because of her extreme hallucinations and delusions. This one product that was very, very concentrated with delta-9 THC was a young man who used it and was suffering from seizures. And the only thing they could identify through lab work was that it was associated with that THC use. So here's some of the products that were sent and associated with these. Most of them look very legitimate. None of them look super sketchy to make the consumer say like, hey, maybe I shouldn't take this. So that's just another problem with the marketplace we're seeing is they look very legitimate. And then right around that 2019 time period, the United States had just passed the Farm Bill, which delineated marijuana from hemp based on how much THC was in the plant. And so we saw this really big rise in the CBD marketplace just because hemp was now legal. But what happened is there was so much CBD in the marketplace and not enough consumer demand for it that the CBD prices fell out of the market, and the manufacturers were like, well, what do we do to continue making a profit? Our stakeholders want to see profits. And what they realized was it's very easy to take CBD and use some simple chemistry and convert it into other cannabinoid products, such as delta-9 THC, Delta 8 THC, and Delta 10 THC. And so right around 2020, 2021 is when we really started seeing this shift of distributors selling those Delta 8 and Delta 10 products, which you may have seen or heard about in the news. It's also very easy for those manufacturers to do a little bit more quick chemistry and turn some of those THC products into other derivatives. So here you can just add a little, essentially vinegar almost, and you'll turn THC into what's called THC acetate, which is supposed to be 3 to 4 times more potent than the THC molecule itself, which is a huge problem. And then here's just an example of some of the other things that we're seeing in the marketplace today. So we like to go out and do what we call surveillance shopping, where we'll secret shop and we go in and we just say, hey, what's some of the crazy stuff that you've gotten in your store? We want it. So we'll take it back to the lab and analyze it. And all of these products that we're seeing that have all of these crazy analogs and derivatives, most of them have on the product label hemp derived or like naturally derived or legal for use. So again, the manufacturers are selling these products and kind of misleading the consumer just based off of their labeling and advertising claims. So today, in the current marketplace, we're seeing that ingredient labels, just like on the nicotine products, are incomplete, accurate, or altogether missing. So this was one product that we secret shopped. It was supposed to just contain THCH, which it did have a little bit of THCH, but that was just such a minute amount of the total product, whereas we identified several other cannabinoids in it that are pharmacologically active in the brain. And you will notice that it said derived from industrial hemp, which again is another term they use to try and give the products legitimacy. Another thing is these semi-synthetic cannabinoids that are in the marketplace today have little or no health and safety data associated with them. And also based on the chemical conversions that are happening to create these molecules, sometimes there's dangerous chemicals that are left behind, like residual solvents that can reach the user. We also know that websites are, sometimes they'll say you can reach a certificate of analysis, which is supposed to be a very official form to give consumers confidence in the product they're using. But when I try and access those certificates, it just says like, oops, page not found, or the file you've requested doesn't exist anymore. Benoid is a giant retailer of all kinds of cannabis-related vaping material. And they, for instance, have about 50 Delta 10 products on their website, but only have 2 certificates of analysis, which they say are supposed to be relevant to all 50 of those products, which just makes no sense. So some things that we've seen from products in the unregulated market. This was a cookie designed to mimic Chips Ahoy. When the product was opened, the cookie itself was very wet, and actually we found hair in the cookie, which was absolutely disgusting. Here are some Delta 8 THC pre-rolls that came in as part of a case report where 3 people used the product, and one of them had such bad seizures that she was out in public and EMS had to be called to assist her. We did what's called microbiological testing, and we found yeast, mold, and bacteria all over those products. This was a gummy product that we found residual solvents in from that process of converting CBD into Delta 8 THC. And then this was a product that was designed to kind of mimic a combustible cigarette. It was supposed to be a Delta 8, and what we found when we looked at it closely was it wasn't plant material at all. It was actually just kind of this greenish brown paper that they had shredded and sprayed a Delta 8 chemical onto. So now that we have lots of back history, I just want to talk about our e-liquid surveillance program particularly as it relates to the collection of confiscated products from our school systems. So again, we've been doing e-liquid surveillance and research since 2014. Because of that, we do have consumers send in their products when they have adverse reactions. We do that surveillance shopping that I talked about. And then it was right around 2019, we had a Central Virginia school system reach out to us and say, hey, we think our kids are putting cocaine in their vapes. And can you test it for us? And we're like, well, we should probably unpack that. But yes, if you can send us the vaping products, we would be more than happy to chemically analyze them and see what's going on. So that's how our confiscated vaping program got stood up. From there, we had 3 schools in Central Virginia send us some of their products. And we broke it down into semesters. So we did the fall semester and then the spring semester. And we kind of compared and contrasted. So altogether, we had 150 products turned into us. They were all nicotine based. Most of them were very fruity or had menthol flavors. We noticed that at least half of them, but more like 80 to 90% of them were those nicotine salt formulations. And one other thing that we noted, because of the timeline of this collection period, it bracketed both COVID as well as when the Trump administration put in that flavor ban, but the ban was only relevant for pod-based products, which meant any refill formulations or any disposable vaping products were not covered under that flavor ban. So in the fall collection, we did have a high number of Juul products that were collected. And then following that flavor ban, we did notice a drop in the number of Juul pods. But at the same time, we saw a rise in the number of disposable bars. So it's kind of interesting the way that you can overlay some of this surveillance data with products, overlaid with what's going on with laws and regulations and seeing how those play off one another. So we were fortunate enough, based off of that initial pilot study, we got funding to continue the program and take it statewide. So in 2023, we tried to contact every school system across Virginia to say, hey, would you like to participate? And we had about 12 schools or school systems say, yes, we're more than happy to send you our products. And this is just the snapshot of the data from that. So we send out kits so that at the time of collecting the confiscated product, we'll get a date. If possible, we ask for the student's grade level. We also like to know how the student acquired the device, if they're willing to tell you. And then we ask if the student had any notable symptoms or side effects at the time of the collection. So in that 1-year period, we got 631 vaping products turned into us, which was fantastic for the research side, not so great when considering how these products were being collected. But you'll see that the majority of them came from Northwestern Virginia or Central Virginia. Here's just a general snapshot of some of the more prevalent device types that were collected over that 1-year period. Any of the products that had cannabinoids, such as THC or CBD in them, have this little star. And what we noticed was some of those products that contain cannabinoids, some of them had an indication on the product that would say, yeah, this probably has cannabis in it. But there were some that had no indication on it as to what was in it. And the reason that I bring that up is we have reached out to the school systems just to inquire what they're doing with products, how people or the students are potentially being disciplined. And some schools have said, well, if it's a nicotine product, we just throw it in the trash. But if it's a cannabis product, we hand it over to law enforcement and it becomes a criminal case. And we're like, well, how do you know exactly what's in the product if it doesn't always say? So we're just trying to raise awareness that you can't always just assume what's in the product based off of how it looks. That being said, we noticed that Lost Mary and Elf Bar were our two most popular brands. However, when you do a little digging into those companies, you'll see that they're actually owned by the same parent company, so they are technically from the same manufacturers. Additionally, as of today, there are 34 approved vaping products comprised of 4 brands. And out of the 95 brands identified through our 2023-2024 collection period, not a single one of them were FDA-approved devices, which means every product confiscated from our school systems in that time frame were from the unregulated market, which we have shown has a lot of issues with quality assurance. If you break down the product types among that collection period, most of them were disposable, which makes sense based off of those are the products that still have all of those fun, fruity flavors available, which students love. And again, here you'll see the majority of the products were labeled as fruit flavored. Some interesting data. When we asked students how they got the products, 84 students said they got it from a friend. 53 said they purchased themselves, which is a huge issue because every single one of those students was under the age of 21, and yet they were still able to access the product to purchase themselves. 34 respondents said other. 8 said a family member bought it for them, which we have also had conversations about. How do we encourage parents to get on board with this message about youth should not have access to these products? We've had some schools say when they turn the vapes over to us, the parents get very angry that it wasn't handed back to them to give back to their kid. So trying to get some messaging out to parents and just the general community to get them educated about this. 6 students said they found it. Sometimes they said they just picked it up off the ground and used it, which to me is terrifying because you don't know where it's been. People said they stole it. They got it from their drug dealer, or they just approached a random person at a shop and said, hey, will you buy this for me? And then another statistic that came out of this collection cycle was this was the first time for our lab that we had any evidence that vaping products had penetrated into the elementary age student population. So we had 3 products come from 4th or 5th graders. And one of those 3 products actually was a cannabis product. So we had a 4th grader using a THC product. For the chemical profile, so I chose Elf Bar because this was one of the more popular ones. So you can see there are all kinds of ingredients that were identified through our analyses process, most of which were not on its label. Overall, we identified nicotine in about 86% of the samples. The majority of those were nicotine salt products. And the reason that we define what are nicotine salts is they tend to have a higher nicotine concentration, which can facilitate earlier and faster addiction. Nicotine salts are supposed to be more readily absorbed into the body, which also gets you that rush, that nicotine rush, much faster than the standard free-base nicotine. And nicotine salts are usually used in products that don't generate a large aerosol cloud, so it doesn't have that cloud associated with it. Additionally, of the nicotine products, we identified synthetic coolants in 73% of them. We were tracking this because synthetic coolants really seemed to hit the market right around the time the FDA was considering banning menthol as a flavoring chemical in products. And it seemed like manufacturers were trying to get ahead of the potential FDA ban. So they stopped putting menthol in, started putting in these synthetic cooling products. And unfortunately, the synthetic cooling products have almost no health and safety data on them. We do know that one of the more prevalent synthetic coolants was actually invented to be used in shaving cream for that cooling sensation on your face. And now we have kids inhaling that and putting that into their lungs, and we don't know what it's going to do to them. This is an example of one of the cannabis products we received. So here you'll see it had dazed 8 on it, which gives you an indication that it probably contains delta 8 THC, and it did. So we found cannabinoids in about 14% of all of the samples analyzed from the 2023-2024 collection period. Most of those products were a combination of cannabinoids, including some of those semi-synthetics that we have little to no health and safety data on, including delta 8 THC, some of the acetate products, and then some of these other new weird ones such as THCP and HHC. Additionally, we were able to quantitate how much of these cannabinoids were in the products, and most of them were highly concentrated. So when you talk about cannabis plant material, my parents' cannabis probably had about 4% THC in it. Cannabis plants today have been crossbred, and there's these strains now that contain sometimes 25 to 30% THC. But these vaping products, because manufacturers are extracting cannabis material out of the plant, they're able to really concentrate it. And some of these were like 80 to 90% THC, which is super concentrated and can lead to some really severe complications and unexpected effects, particularly if it's a cannabis naive individual using it. And then we did have a couple of submissions that contained paraphernalia. So one example here is in one collection kit, we got this pipe and a stash jar. And so we sampled and analyzed that also. And in both the pipe and the stash jar, we found all kinds of drugs other than nicotine. So we identified methamphetamine, nicotine, some methamphetamine byproducts here, several different kinds of cannabinoids, and then also, this synthetic cannabinoid. So from the sampling, we can't tell if this student was using all of those substances at once, or if maybe they used a substance, didn't wash their stash jar and pipe out, put another substance in, and it just kind of accumulated. But overall, the analysis of the paraphernalia that you all are finding in school systems can be informative about a wider range of substances that these students are using, in addition to what's being used in the vaping products. Another thing that we've been able to track through this confiscation program is just how the products are evolving. So for instance, Elf Bar was called to court several times for like manufacturing infringement practices. There was a lawsuit saying, hey, I had the name Elf Bar first and you copied me. So that's why they went from Elf Bar to BC 500, EB Design to BC 5000, EB Create. We've also seen that there appear to be these knockoff products. So if you go online, there's a couple websites that will describe what to look for. But we saw for the two products here, they were different flavors, but the exact same design with the color scheme. And then the middle to bottom photos, we had the same flavor, strawberry banana, but a difference of color. And so that slightly lighter color is supposed to indicate a potential knockoff. So the concern there is that a consumer thinks they're getting a legitimate product, they're purchasing this knockoff, which probably has even more quality assurance issues behind it. So overall, from the 2019 through the 2024 collection, we had a couple trends that we identified. First off, menthol seemed to be replaced with the synthetic coolants. I am curious because the FDA just said, no, we're not going to ban menthol. It's okay in e-cigarettes. So I'll be curious to see if the percent of menthol products actually goes back up in the next collection cycle. We also noticed that the number of nicotine vapes decreased while the percent of cannabis vapes increased from 2019 to 2024. That could be because in 2021, Virginia changed their stance on cannabis legislation. Following that, we had several shops pop up that you can just walk into and buy all kinds of cannabis products from that probably aren't IDing individuals like they should. So that could be one reason why we see this increased prevalence of cannabis vapes in our student population. And then also, vapes unfortunately have penetrated into the elementary population. I don't know personally at what level, what grade level Virginia has mandated, hey, we need to start talking to our kids about vaping. But if we're not doing it at the elementary age, we really should be starting there because it is a problem. So from that project, we found the age laws and the school policies are still ineffective at deterring student use. The state cannabis policies seem to potentially be impacting the prevalence of cannabis products accessible to our youth. And despite the 2020 flavoring chemical bans, those flavored e-liquids are still very widely available. And this leads us into our current collection cycle. So we're getting ready to wrap up this year. We are still taking collections, so we don't have a full data set yet, but just a quick snapshot so everyone knows where we are. We've received 337 submissions to date, and we have 57 schools or school systems that have signed up to participate in our program this year. We're still seeing students acquiring their devices from friends or purchasing it themselves. We're seeing more people respond saying they're getting it from their local vape shop. So far, we have not had any turned in from elementary. We'll see what happens when we have our final collection data. And of the 337 products turned in, we have 125 that have been chemically analyzed. Most of those products were disposable and they had a fruity flavor. About 90% of them had nicotine and about 10% of them contained one or more cannabinoids. In 5 of the products, we've identified ethanol as an unlabeled ingredient. And this year, in addition to the chemical analysis to see what's in the products, we're also testing them to see if they have yeast, mold, or bacteria. So we've just started that work, but we already have some products showing up where there's mold or bacteria found in the vape liquid. So we will continue with that work and hopefully have an update for y'all probably in the fall of this year. So if your school is already participating, I would like to thank you so much. Some quick notes. Proper bagging of the devices is really critical just to make sure that there's no cross-contamination on shipping. If one product leaks on all the others, we can no longer tell what chemical came from what product. And also, we do ask that you fill out as much of that form data as possible because it is a great way to collect some insight as to how products are being acquired and used. If you are in a school system and you're not yet participating but would like to, we would love to have you. You can scan this QR code and it should get you access to a form to fill out that I will receive with information to send you a kit. Or you can email us or just talk to me after the presentation. If there's anything that you saw today that you would like more information on, I have some links here for you also. On the left is a Google folder where we share all kinds of our educational material. We have manuscripts, we have posters, we have little one-page pamphlets that you can print out and share. If you would like us to come out to your school or place of work, we're more than happy to take presentation requests. If you want updates, you can follow this form here and I can come back to that if anyone needs it. I would like to acknowledge the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth. Without their funding for this project, it would not be possible. It takes a lot of hands to organize all of this data and complete the analysis. So we have a wonderful team at VCU. It's mostly a student-driven research program, so they're getting really good hands-on experience and are going to be wonderful scientists entering the marketplace soon. And with that, I will take any questions that you all have about anything I've talked about or any burning questions that you think I might have information for you on. So thank you.
Amazing presentation, Dr. Holt. really important information that we need to be getting out into our communities. There were a couple of questions that had come in and that you already answered, which included how to get a school district involved if they're interested, and then that you have resources available that we can share in the community. I don't know if you have any other ideas regarding how we can reach parents with some of this information and community members, if there's other places we can go to. I'll hold for a second and see if there's any questions from participants. We have one asking if you would accept products from citizens not associated with the school and how that would happen.
Yes, so if you would like to email me, we can have a conversation just to kind of figure out if we're talking about one or two products or if it's a whole bunch of products. It wouldn't be covered through this grant program, so we would have to see if it's feasible for us to do no charge. But I would definitely love to have a conversation, particularly if you have a particular concern. And for Elizabeth asking about metals as toxins, yes, we know that the concern of heavy metals reaching a user's lungs, it's a big problem. Our lab has done some work in the past demonstrating how when you first purchase a product, we have used a microscope to analyze the coil, and you'll see it's nice and shiny and new. And then after 50 burns or 100 burns or 200 burns, you start to see the metal coil kind of have these pock marks and they're flaking, which indicates that it's getting it's breaking off of the coil and is potentially inhaled. There can also be heavy metals and toxins in the e-liquid from the manufacturing process, or it could be leaching out of the device itself. All that to say, though, we recognize it's a problem. My research lab does not have the instrumentation necessary to do heavy metals analysis, so I don't have much more information on that, but I do recognize that it is a concern.
I was in a presentation, and it might have been with one of your colleagues talking about the amount of nicotine in the average amount of nicotine in vape products now versus, we used to say about a pack of half worth of cigarettes in one pod. And has that increased over the years? I was in a presentation that I heard it was a little bit higher than that.
Yes, so that kind of leads back to the discussion about free-base nicotine versus nicotine salts. So free-base nicotine was where the market started, and most of those products would have like maybe 0.3 to 3% nicotine in the liquid. Now, because we have these nicotine salts, they're easier to inhale, they're easier to hold in the lungs. They don't give your throat as much of a burn. So manufacturers have used these nicotine salts to really jack up the nicotine concentration. And now we're seeing products with as much as 6 or 7% nicotine in them. Also, whereas the original pod products usually had about 0.5 ml to 1 ml worth of liquid in them, some of these disposable products that we're seeing come in now have chambers that hold up to like 5 to 10 milliliters of e-liquid, which is a huge jump in the volume available in the product itself. So we have a greater volume of liquid with a greater concentration of nicotine, just facilitating more and more nicotine usage.
Thank you so much. I have another question that's come in related to, have you had an opportunity to bring presentation to school boards as they deal oftentimes with discipline matters and properly labeled items, among other things?
Yeah, we try and attend as many school-based functions as we possibly can. We've had some schools reach out asking us to come present to their school board. We've had a couple PTAs have us come down and speak at PTA meetings. We are hoping to get to there's a Virginia principals meeting here in, I think, Norfolk in June this year that we're hoping to attend so that we can ideally get every school principal in Virginia this information to share. But if anyone knows of an organization that would like us to come present, we are happy to. It's part of our goal is just to get as much education out there to the community as we possibly can.
Thank you. And then I have another question. What information should we use to discourage elementary school students specifically if that's I mean, just if you specifically have ideas specifically for elementary school kids?
Um, so I don't have kids of my own, so I have very limited interactions with them. But I think some things to think about would be talking about the chemicals in the products. We don't know what's in them. We don't know how it's going to harm their growth potential, their brain development. There are some studies saying that it could impact how the brain develops, which could impact things down the road, you know. So saying you want to be an amazing astronaut, maybe you shouldn't be smoking and ruining those brain connections that are going to be required to really excel in school, or um, they're going to hurt your heart and your lungs. And if you want to be an Olympic athlete one day, maybe you shouldn't smoke or pick it up. Also, we're thinking that all of these analyses that we're doing to look at yeast, mold, and bacteria is going to be very gross and probably a really good visual to show young people to say, look at how disgusting these products are. Do you really want to inhale that and put that in their body? So we're trying to think of things outside of the box, get students some good visuals, and letting them make their own informed decisions rather than letting the vaping industry run the narrative.
Thank you so much. And I did just want to touch base. The state has an initiative where every 2 years, all prevention departments within the Community Service Board go out and do tobacco vendor visits to talk about not selling to minors. And we also work at a state level and a local level to do compliance checks at locations where there are there's tobacco being sold, and especially when we've partnered with local law enforcement officers, really the majority of failures as it relates to compliance checks are happening at these vape shops that are popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we as a community need to kind of think about and respond to.
Yeah, I agree. And my boss, Dr. Michelle Peace, and I have been working on writing up some proposed documents to share at the next General Assembly meeting, where we are going to encourage them to consider legislation saying any sort of nicotine product should be treated just like an alcohol product. And in order to purchase it, a physical state ID should be presented. It has to be scanned. And we're hoping that if some language kind of like that gets adopted, it will help reduce the number of sales to minors. We're also proposing that they should figure out a way to essentially just ban online sales, because it makes it so easy for anyone of any age to go on. You just click a box saying, yes, I acknowledge I'm 21, even though they're like 10 years old. So if we could get rid of the online marketplace, I think that would also close some of the routes of access for young people. But unfortunately, I don't have a say in what gets voted on legislation. We can only advocate.
Provide information. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for the resources and the information you've provided today. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. We hope that each of you have a great day.